Have you ever caught someone red-handed stealing electricity from you, only to have them call the cops on you? That's exactly what happened when I discovered my HOA president had been running illegal power lines from my grandfather's cabin to her mansion for 8 months. Brenda Thornfield wasn't just stealing our electricity, she was bleeding us dry with fake violation notices while powering her heated driveway and grow lights. When I confronted her with proof, she didn't apologize. She escalated. Cut power to my 89-year-old grandfather's oxygen machine during a February blizzard, then dialed 911, screaming that I was stealing community electricity and threatening a disabled veteran. My grandfather almost died that night. I found him gasping, blue-lipped, his medical equipment silent in the freezing cabin. That's when I decided to show her who really owned the power around here. The look on her face when she found out, she completely froze. "Drop your state. Where's my power squad watching from tonight?" Let me take you back to where this nightmare started. My name's Samuel Gallagher, and I'm a 45-year-old electrical engineer who thought inheriting my grandfather's cabin would be the best thing that ever happened to me. Boy, was I wrong. See, my grandfather Walter built this place back in 1952 on 5 acres of pristine Colorado mountain land in what's now called Pine Ridge Commons. But Walter wasn't just any builder. He was one of the founding members of the rural electrification project that brought power to this entire valley. Picture a rustic log cabin with a wraparound porch, hand-carved railings that still smell like pine sap when the sun hits them, and solar panels I'd upgraded myself gleaming on the metal roof. The place was my sanctuary, especially after my divorce left me feeling like I'd lost everything else that mattered. Every weekend, I'd drive up from Denver with Walter, now 89 and using an oxygen concentrator, to run workshops for underprivileged kids, teaching them solar power basics, circuit design, anything to get them interested in the trades. The sound of their laughter echoing through those pine trees, the crunch of aspen leaves under their boots as they worked on projects, Walter's proud smile as he shared stories about the old days when men built things to last. That cabin represented 3 generations of Gallagher legacy. Then, Pine Ridge Commons happened. Over the years, developers had built 200 cookie-cutter homes around our property, turning Walter's peaceful retreat into the center of a suburban maze. Every house looked identical. Beige siding, black shutters, manicured lawns that probably got measured with rulers. The whole place felt like a movie set where someone forgot to add personality. And ruling over this beige empire was Brenda Thornfield. Picture the kind of woman who drives a white BMW with vanity plates reading HOA4EVR, carries a clipboard like it's a scepter, and has never done an honest day's manual labor in her perfectly manicured life. Brenda had been HOA president for 3 years, wielding those bylaws like weapons against anyone who dared think outside her suburban box. The woman had a real estate background, which explained her obsession with property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Her McMansion sat at the community entrance, 4,000 square feet of architectural blandness with a heated driveway, grow lights blazing from every window, and enough outdoor illumination to guide aircraft to a landing strip. Our first confrontation happened on a crisp October morning when I found Brenda on my porch, clipboard in hand, high heels clicking aggressively against the wooden planks Walter had installed by hand. "Mr. Gallagher," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "This structure violates community standards. The rustic appearance affects neighboring property values, and those solar panels are an absolute eyesore." I gripped Walter's hand-carved railing, feeling the smooth grooves worn by decades of family gatherings. "Ma'am, this cabin was here 30 years before your HOA existed. My grandfather was the original landowner who sold those plots to your developers." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, times change, don't they? You have 30 days to paint this structure beige to match our approved color palette, or you'll face daily fines starting at $100, escalating to $500. She handed me violation notices, the papers rustling like dead leaves. "Oh, and those little workshops of yours? We'll need to discuss whether running a commercial operation is appropriate for residential zoning." As she clicked back to her BMW, I caught something that made my electrical engineer brain pause. The distinct hum of overloaded transformers and the smell of diesel exhaust mixing with clean mountain air. For a community that prided itself on energy efficiency, Something wasn't adding up about the power consumption around here. I had no idea I was looking at the biggest electrical thief in 3 counties. Brenda Thornfield wasn't the type to make idle threats. Within a week of our porch confrontation, she'd done her homework, and I mean the kind of research that would make a private investigator proud. First came the certified letter, delivered with enough official stamps to make you think the FBI was involved. Notice of commercial activity violation, it read in bold red letters. Apparently, Brenda had spent her weekend digging through county records, discovering that my cabin predated the HOA by 30 years, and decided to play a different angle. She filed a complaint with the county, claiming I was running an illegal commercial operation with my youth workshops. According to her complaint, I was operating an unlicensed trade school that posed significant safety hazards to the community. The woman had actually counted the number of teenagers coming to my property and documented their license plates like she was running surveillance. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sawdust filled my workshop that Saturday morning when the county inspector showed up unannounced. I was teaching 15-year-old Jake Morrison how to wire a simple solar panel array when this official-looking guy in a hard hat started poking around, clearly expecting to find code violations everywhere. "Sir, I need to see your electrical permits, business licenses, and safety documentation," he announced, pulling out a digital camera. "Here's something I'd learned from my years as an electrical engineer. Documentation is your best defense against bureaucratic harassment." I handed him a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Every permit, every inspection certificate, every safety protocol I'd implemented over 3 years of running these workshops. The inspector's confident expression slowly deflated as he flipped through page after page of documentation that exceeded every county requirement by a significant margin. "This is remarkably thorough," he admitted, testing the GFCI outlets I'd installed throughout the workshop. "Your electrical work is actually better than most commercial facilities I inspect." That's when Jake, bless his heart, piped up. "Mr. Gallagher taught us how to do all the safety checks ourselves. Want to see our emergency shutdown procedures?" For the next hour, I watched this kid demonstrate electrical safety protocols with the confidence of someone who'd found his calling. The inspector was so impressed he ended up staying for lunch, asking questions about my solar setup, and taking notes about my teaching methods. But Brenda's first major assault had backfired spectacularly. Not only did I pass inspection with flying colors, but the county inspector actually commended my program and suggested I apply for official educational certification. That's when she escalated to psychological warfare. Brenda organized what she called a safety committee meeting, inviting every homeowner within a quarter-mile radius to discuss the ongoing security concerns posed by my property. The meeting was held at her McMansion, naturally. I wasn't invited, but Dorothy Vance, a sweet 78-year-old retired teacher who lived 3 houses down, filled me in on the details later. "That woman stood up there with a PowerPoint presentation," Dorothy told me, her voice trembling with indignation as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange. "She had photos of your cabin, your workshop, even pictures of the kids' cars parked on the street, called it a comprehensive threat assessment." According to Dorothy, Brenda painted a picture of dangerous teenagers learning to work with electricity, unsupervised access to power tools, and the inevitable liability issues that would destroy everyone's property values. She'd even brought fake testimonials from concerned parents, worried about their children's safety. The worst part was when she claimed your grandfather's old wiring was creating fire hazards for the entire community. She actually suggested the county should condemn the property for public safety. That night, listening to the wind whistle through the pine trees, I decided it was time to fight fire with fire. I spent the next 2 weeks diving deep into property records, going back to 1952, when Walter first bought the land. What I discovered was fascinating. My grandfather hadn't just owned the property. He'd retained specific easements and rights that were grandfathered into every subsequent development agreement. The cabin had explicit protections for agricultural and educational use that no HOA bylaw could override. I remembered reading about similar cases during my engineering studies, where original property rights often supersede later restrictions. It was like finding a legal ace up my sleeve. But the real revelation came when I started documenting Brenda's enforcement patterns. I drove through Pine Ridge Commons with a camera, noting every single bylaw violation I could find. The Hendersons' bright blue front door? No violation notice. Mrs. Ryan's elaborate garden gnome collection? Perfectly acceptable. The Johnsons' RV parked in their driveway for 6 months? Not a problem. Somehow, my historically protected cabin was the biggest threat to community standards Pine Ridge Commons had ever faced. I filed a counter-complaint, documenting Brenda's discriminatory enforcement, and started keeping detailed logs of every interaction. What I didn't know yet was that her obsession with my property had nothing to do with aesthetics or safety. She was covering up something much bigger, and much more profitable. If I thought Brenda's first attack was aggressive, her second wave was downright vicious. The woman had clearly decided that subtlety wasn't working, so she switched to what I can only describe as suburban warfare. It started with the road blockage. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find orange traffic cones blocking the access road that led to my cabin. Not the main community entrance, just the narrow gravel path that had connected my grandfather's property to the outside world for 70 years. A hand-painted sign read, "Private community property, authorized vehicles only." Below it, in smaller print, "Violators will be towed at owner's expense." The smell of fresh asphalt and diesel exhaust hung heavy in the evening air as I stood there, keys jingling in my hand, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she'd just said when I called to complain. "Oh, Mr. Gallagher, the Safety Committee voted to restrict access to non-conforming properties until code compliance can be verified. It's really for everyone's protection. Ma'am, this road provides legal access to my property. You can't just..." Well, actually, according to our legal counsel, the road crosses community property, which gives the HOA authority to regulate usage. Here's something I'd learned from dealing with municipal electrical codes. When bureaucrats overreach, they usually forget about federal regulations. I hung up and made 2 calls, one to my lawyer, another to the Postal Service. By Thursday morning, a very angry postal supervisor was standing at Brenda's front door, explaining in vivid detail how blocking mail delivery violated federal law and could result in criminal charges. The cones disappeared by noon, but instead of backing down, Brenda's humiliation only made her more dangerous. She launched what I can only describe as administrative terrorism. Every morning brought a new violation notice. Improper parking, for my truck being 2 inches over an imaginary line. Noise violation, for running a saw at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Landscaping non-compliance, because my wildflower meadow didn't match the community's approved grass mixture. Dorothy Vance started documenting everything for me. "Honey," she told me one afternoon, her weathered hands shaking with anger, "I've lived here 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. She's completely lost her mind." The psychological pressure campaign reached its peak during what I now call the Great Trespassing Incident. I was in my workshop teaching Jake Morrison how to install a GFCI outlet when I heard footsteps on my porch. Through the window, I watched Brenda and 2 other board members conducting what they called a safety inspection of my property. They were taking photos of my electrical panel, my solar installation, even peering through windows of my cabin. The crunch of gravel under their feet mixed with the sound of camera shutters clicking as they documented every aspect of my grandfather's property. I stepped outside. "Excuse me, but you're on private property without permission." Brenda turned, her face flushed with the confidence of someone who thought they held all the cards. "Mr. Gallagher, the HOA has the right to inspect properties for safety violations. We're conducting a comprehensive assessment. Not without a warrant, or my permission you don't." "Actually," she said, pulling out her phone, "I'm calling the sheriff's department right now to report suspicious activity and potential code violations." That's when something beautiful happened. Jake Morrison stepped out of the workshop, still wearing his safety glasses, holding the GFCI outlet we'd been installing. "Mr. Gallagher," he said in a voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, "should I call the county inspector who was here last month? The one who said our electrical work was the best he'd seen in a residential setting?" The color drained from Brenda's face. She hadn't expected witnesses, and she definitely hadn't expected a teenager who knew the difference between legal inspections and harassment. "We'll be filing our report," she muttered, backing toward her BMW with her committee members in tow. That evening, I sat on Walter's porch reviewing the photos I'd taken of their inspection, when something caught my attention. In the background of one shot, I could clearly see a thick orange extension cord running from the community electrical junction box toward Brenda's property. My engineering brain started connecting dots I hadn't noticed before. During my evening walks, I'd been hearing transformers humming under loads they shouldn't be carrying. Certain houses, especially Brenda's McMansion, showed power consumption patterns that didn't make sense for their size. I pulled out my laptop and started researching electrical load calculations for the community. What I found made my blood run cold. Someone was stealing massive amounts of electricity, and I was starting to suspect I knew exactly who. Finding that extension cord in my photo was like discovering a smoking gun, but I needed more evidence before I could prove anything. What I didn't expect was for Brenda to hand me that evidence on a silver platter while trying to destroy my life. The attacks became personal. Brenda had clearly done her homework on my divorce, because she started weaponizing my past in ways that made my skin crawl. First came the motion to revoke my educational use permit, filed with the county and copied to my ex-wife Jennifer. The document was a masterpiece of character assassination. According to Brenda's filing, my recent divorce and documented instability made me unsuitable for supervising minors. She claimed my obsession with the isolated cabin property raised red flags about my mental state, and suggested that my workshops were really just a way for a lonely divorced man to inappropriately interact with teenagers. The sound of my phone buzzing at 6 a.m. woke me up. Jennifer's name on the caller ID made my stomach drop. "Samuel, what the hell is this woman talking about? Some HOA president just sent me a legal document claiming you're running some kind of sketchy operation with kids." I could hear the confusion and concern in my ex-wife's voice, mixed with the familiar background noise of her morning coffee routine. We'd had our differences during the divorce, but Jennifer knew me better than anyone. "Jen, it's a harassment campaign. I'm teaching kids electrical skills, just like I used to do with the scout troops. Everything's documented, inspected, completely above board." "Samuel, I've known you for 15 years. If you say it's legitimate, then it's legitimate. Do you need a character witness statement?" Her unexpected support should have been a relief, but Brenda was simultaneously pressuring local businesses to boycott anyone who helped my program. She'd convinced 3 board members to vote for an emergency assessment to fund legal action against my non-conforming property use. For 2 weeks, I'd been tracking those extension cords during evening walks, following their paths through landscaping and under decks. The thick orange cables consistently led back to the same cluster of houses, all owned by current or former HOA board members. But the main line, the one I'd first spotted in my photo, ran directly from the community electrical junction box to Brenda's property. And it was feeding enough power to run a small factory. On a frigid February evening, I finally followed the cable to its source. The smell of ozone mixed with pine needles as I crouched behind the utility shed, documenting what I found with my phone's camera. The junction box supplying power to the entire Pine Ridge Commons development had been illegally modified. Someone had bypassed the main meter and installed a sophisticated direct feed that was siphoning massive amounts of electricity without detection. This wasn't amateur hour. Whoever did this had serious electrical knowledge. The hum of overloaded transformers filled the night air as I photographed the illegal bypass. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Brenda's voice cut through the winter silence like a blade. She stood there in her expensive parka, flashlight trembling in her hand, clearly not expecting to find anyone near her theft operation at 11 p.m. "Documenting a crime," I replied calmly, continuing to take photos. "This is an illegal electrical bypass, stealing power from the community grid." The look on her face was pure panic. She'd been caught red-handed, and we both knew it. That's when she made the call that sealed her fate. Instead of backing down or trying to explain, Brenda pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report a man tampering with electrical equipment and threatening community safety. He's acting erratically, and I'm genuinely afraid." Someone had deliberately disconnected my power at the community junction box, the same box where I'd caught Brenda stealing electricity just hours earlier. As I stood there in the pitch-black cabin, listening to my grandfather's desperate wheezing getting worse without his oxygen concentrator, I realized Brenda Thornfield had just crossed a line that would destroy her completely. She'd tried to kill a war veteran to cover up her crimes. Racing through a blizzard at 3 a.m. to save your grandfather's life has a way of clarifying your priorities. As I drove my truck through snow-covered mountain roads with a portable generator rattling in the bed, listening to Walter's panicked voicemails growing weaker by the minute, I knew one thing for certain. Brenda Thornfield had just signed her own death warrant. I got Walter stabilized with the generator, called paramedics to check his vitals, and spent the rest of that night sitting by his bedside, watching his oxygen levels slowly return to normal. The sound of his steady breathing mixed with the generator's rumble became the soundtrack to my planning her destruction. "That woman tried to kill me, didn't she?" Walter asked, as dawn broke over the mountains, his voice hoarse but determined. "Yeah, Grandpa, she did." "Then it's time you learned what your grandmother and I really left you." His eyes, still sharp despite his age, fixed on mine with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. "Samuel, this cabin isn't just your inheritance, it's your weapon." The smell of old cedar and mothballs filled my nose as Walter directed me to an ancient chest tucked behind his favorite reading chair. My hands trembled as I lifted the heavy lid, expecting maybe some family photos or old letters. What I found instead changed everything. Wrapped in oilcloth and perfectly preserved were documents that made my engineering brain spin. Original incorporation papers for Pine Ridge Power Cooperative, signed by Walter Gallagher as founding member and major shareholder. Stock certificates dating back to 1951. Utility easement agreements that had been accumulating legal power for over 70 years. "Your grandmother kept everything," Walter wheezed, watching my face as I processed what I was holding. "After the divorce and everything, I figured you had enough on your plate. But now..." I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the paper crackling like dry leaves under my fingers. According to these legal papers, Walter hadn't just owned land. He'd owned 23% of the utility company that supplied electricity to 3 counties. The same utility company that powered every single house in Pine Ridge Commons, including Brenda's mansion. My laptop screen glowed in the morning light as I researched Pine Ridge Power Cooperative. Current value, $2.3 million. Customer base, over 3,000 accounts. And sitting in an account I'd never known existed were dividend payments totaling $180,000. Money that had been waiting for me to claim it. But the real revelation hit me like lightning. According to the original easement agreements, I didn't just own shares in the company. I owned the actual electrical transmission infrastructure running through the entire development. Every power line, every transformer, every junction box that Brenda had been stealing from. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Brenda Thornfield had spent months harassing the one person who could legally shut off her electricity with a single phone call. She'd been stealing power from her own landlord. I reached for my phone, my hands steady for the first time in hours. The first call went to Pine Ridge Power Cooperative's legal department. "This is Samuel Gallagher, board member and major shareholder. I need to report massive electrical theft and request an emergency investigation." The second call went to the FBI's white-collar crime division, because when you steal hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of electricity from a utility company, that's not just theft, it's federal wire fraud. By noon, I had investigators from 3 different agencies coordinating their response to what was looking like the largest utility theft case in Colorado history. Walter watched me work from his oxygen chair, that satisfied smile spreading across his weathered face like sunrise over the mountains. "Your grandmother always said this cabin would protect our family," he told me. Guess she was right. I looked out at the snow-covered development below us, knowing that Brenda was probably in her heated mansion right now, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. "Grandpa," I said, "it's about to do a lot more than protect us." The next 72 hours were a masterclass in strategic warfare. While Brenda thought she'd silenced me by nearly killing my grandfather, I was quietly assembling the kind of legal and technical arsenal that would make her wish she'd never heard the name Gallagher. My first stop was the Pine Ridge Power Cooperative headquarters, a modest brick building that looked nothing like the seat of power it actually was. The smell of coffee and ozone from electrical equipment filled the lobby as I walked in with a briefcase that would shake this place to its foundations. "Mr. Gallagher," said Patricia Ryan, the company's lead counsel, after reviewing Walter's original papers, "do you understand what you've inherited? You're not just a shareholder. You're effectively the second largest stakeholder in a multi-million-dollar utility company." She spread out maps showing electrical grids across 3 counties, her finger tracing power lines like a general planning a battle. The irony was delicious. While Brenda had been stealing my electricity, she'd been stealing from her own power company. "What about theft investigations?" I asked, trying not to smile. Her eyes lit up like she'd just discovered buried treasure. "Oh, Mr. Gallagher, utility theft is our specialty. When someone steals electricity on this scale, we don't just disconnect their service, we prosecute them into bankruptcy." That afternoon, I met FBI Special Agent Rodriguez at a coffee shop where the aroma of espresso mixed with the sweet smell of impending justice. I showed him photos of Brenda's illegal electrical bypass, watching his expression shift from professional interest to genuine excitement. "Based on transformer loads and cable specifications," I explained, pulling out my engineering calculations. "She's been stealing approximately $3,000 worth of electricity per month for 8 months. That's $24,000 in direct theft, plus infrastructure damage. That crosses the federal threshold for wire fraud," he said, making notes that would destroy Brenda's life. "We'll need detailed documentation." "Agent Rodriguez, I'm an electrical engineer who's been documenting everything for months. I can give you time-stamped photos, power consumption analyses, and a paper trail showing systematic harassment to cover up the theft." His predatory smile reminded me of a wolf spotting a wounded deer. "Mr. Gallagher, you're going to enjoy watching us work." Back at the cabin, I converted Walter's living room into a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, like battle plans, organized with military precision, utility ownership papers, theft documentation, harassment evidence, witness statements. The smell of old paper mixed with fresh coffee as I worked late into the night. Dorothy Vance had provided a timeline of Brenda's discriminatory enforcement that read like a prosecutor's dream. Jake Morrison had written a detailed account of the illegal property inspection that would make any jury's blood boil. Even Jennifer had faxed over a character statement that demolished Brenda's unstable divorced man narrative. But the real masterpiece was my technical preparation. I'd installed professional-grade monitoring equipment around my property, creating an electronic record of every power fluctuation and electrical anomaly. The data showed clear evidence of grid manipulation during peak theft hours, evidence that would hold up in federal court. The most satisfying part was preparing the community presentation. Dorothy had called an emergency HOA meeting under the pretense of addressing urgent community infrastructure concerns. She'd booked the high school gymnasium, ensuring maximum attendance and media coverage. "Honey," Dorothy told me, her voice crackling with anticipation, "I've been president of the garden club for 20 years. I know how to pack a room when justice needs serving. I spent 2 days creating visual aids designed for maximum impact, high-resolution photos of illegal bypasses, engineering diagrams showing power flow like arteries bleeding money, financial calculations that would make every resident understand exactly how much Brenda had stolen from their community. Each slide told a story even non-technical audiences could follow, building toward the moment when I'd reveal my true identity as their power company owner. The presentation was structured like a legal argument: establish the crime, prove the motive, reveal the solution. Meanwhile, Walter was making his own preparations. Despite his recent brush with death, he'd insisted on attending the meeting, oxygen tank and all. "That woman tried to murder me," he said, adjusting his VFW cap with the determination of a soldier heading into battle. "I want to look her in the eye when she falls." 3 days before the confrontation, everything aligned like planets preparing for eclipse. FBI warrants were signed. Pine Ridge Power Cooperative had prepared service disconnection orders. The district attorney's office was standing by with federal fraud charges that could put Brenda in prison for years. I'd also discovered the perfect final twist. Brenda's development deal included a $500,000 finder's fee for delivering my property, money she'd already spent on McMansion renovations. When her theft operation collapsed, She wouldn't just face criminal charges, she'd lose everything, including the house she'd stolen electricity to heat. As I sat on Walter's porch that final evening, watching sunset paint the mountains gold, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the calm satisfaction of knowing that tomorrow, justice would finally be served with compound interest. Brenda Thornfield had 3 days to enjoy her false sense of victory. 3 days to believe she'd successfully silenced me by nearly killing my grandfather. What she didn't know was that every desperate move she made was being documented by someone who understood exactly how to build an airtight federal case. The woman was in full panic mode, and watching her self-destruct was almost beautiful. Tuesday morning brought the sound of diesel engines rumbling past my kitchen window. A contractor's truck had pulled up to the community electrical junction box, and through binoculars, I watched 2 men working frantically to remove the illegal bypass equipment Brenda had installed. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet anticipation of watching criminals destroy evidence in broad daylight. What Brenda didn't realize was that removing stolen equipment after being caught actually made her federal charges worse. Agent Rodriguez had explained consciousness of guilt. When criminals try to cover up their crimes, it proves they knew they were breaking the law. I photographed everything: the removal process, the contractor's license plates, even the damaged transformer housings that would serve as permanent evidence. You can't steal thousands of dollars worth of electricity for 8 months without leaving scars that any electrical engineer can identify. By noon, Brenda escalated to bureaucratic warfare. She filed an emergency complaint, claiming my property was creating imminent electrical hazards that threatened the entire community. According to her filing, my solar panels were creating dangerous backfeed, and Walter's medical equipment was overloading shared transformers. The crunch of gravel announced the arrival of 3 county trucks, 2 state electrical inspectors, and a confused sheriff's deputy who'd clearly been told this was a life-threatening emergency. "Mr. Gallagher, we've received reports of dangerous electrical conditions requiring immediate investigation," announced the lead inspector. I handed him my comprehensive documentation folder, the same one that had impressed every previous inspector. "Everything's up to code, but while you're here, you might want to examine the community junction box. There's evidence of recent tampering creating actual safety hazards." For 2 hours, I watched 3 licensed engineers examine every aspect of my installation. The results were predictable. Not only was everything perfectly safe, but my systems exceeded requirements by significant margins. But when they examined the community junction box, their expressions shifted from routine boredom to professional alarm. "Sir, someone's been running unauthorized high-voltage connections from this power source. The transformer damage suggests massive electrical theft over an extended period. Any idea who might have access to modify community electrical infrastructure?" I asked with practiced innocence. "That would require HOA approval and detailed system knowledge. We'll need to interview the board president immediately." While inspectors documented Brenda's crime scene, she crossed the line from desperate to evil. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison. "Mr. G, some ladies at my school talking to the principal about your program. Says you're dangerous." The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth. Brenda was now targeting teenagers who'd found purpose in my workshop program. She'd driven to Jake's high school and filed complaints claiming I operated an unlicensed educational facility that endangered minor children. That's when I realized something that made me smile. Brenda had no idea who Jake Morrison's mother was. I called Sarah Morrison, head nurse at Denver General's trauma unit and former Army medic who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. "Sarah, someone's trying to destroy the workshop program by filing false child endangerment complaints." The silence on the phone was terrifying. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice carried the controlled fury of someone who'd seen real danger and knew the difference between genuine threats and suburban hysteria. "Samuel, that boy comes home every weekend talking about circuit design and solar panels. He's found his passion because of you. Anyone who tries to destroy that is going to deal with me, personally." By evening, community WhatsApp groups buzzed with Brenda's rumors about safety investigations and child endangerment concerns. She was systematically destroying my reputation while removing evidence of her crimes. But desperation makes people stupid. Around 10 p.m., my security cameras caught movement near the junction box. Two figures in dark clothing worked by flashlight, trying to complete their evidence destruction. I grabbed my telephoto camera and crept through pine-scented darkness to document their midnight operation. Through the crisp mountain air, I could hear muffled arguments about getting the last cables and making sure nothing traces back. One voice was unmistakably Brenda's. The other belonged to Bill Henshaw, a county electrical contractor who'd been banned from community infrastructure work after previous safety violations. Perfect. She'd hired the one contractor guaranteed to make this a bigger federal case. As I photographed their operation, something even more beautiful happened. Henshaw's flashlight illuminated a utility company marking stake I'd had installed that afternoon, a stake that clearly identified the junction box as Pine Ridge Power Cooperative property. Brenda was destroying evidence on property I legally owned, while being photographed by the property owner, after threatening a federal witness. At that moment, crouched in the forest, watching two felons commit obstruction of justice, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my divorce. Absolute clarity about my purpose. Tomorrow's town hall meeting wasn't just about exposing Brenda's crimes. It was about showing an entire community what justice looked like when good people finally fought back. The morning of the town hall meeting, Brenda Thornfield made her final, fatal mistake. She decided to go nuclear. I woke up to the sound of sirens at 6 a.m. Not just one or two, a full convoy of emergency vehicles screaming up the mountain road toward my cabin. Fire trucks, ambulances, hazmat units, even a bomb squad van that looked like it belonged in a war zone. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with morning pine air as I stepped onto my porch in my bathrobe, watching this circus arrive. At the head of the convoy was Brenda's white BMW, followed by news vans from 3 different television stations. She'd called in a fake chemical emergency. "Mr. Gallagher," shouted the fire chief through a megaphone, "we need you to evacuate immediately. We've received reports of hazardous materials storage and potential explosive devices on your property." I walked down to meet them, hands visible, moving slowly like I'd learned during my military contractor days. "Chief, there are no hazardous materials here. This is harassment related to an ongoing HOA dispute." But Brenda was already giving interviews to news cameras, standing just far enough away to look concerned, while describing my property as a compound where a mentally unstable individual was stockpiling dangerous chemicals and indoctrinating vulnerable children. The woman had gone full scorched earth, trying to destroy my reputation on live television before tonight's meeting. For 3 hours, I watched hazmat specialists examine every square inch of my workshop. They tested my electrical equipment, my solar batteries, even Walter's oxygen tanks. The only hazardous materials they found were standard electrical components and cleaning supplies you'd find in any garage. "Sir," the hazmat team leader told me, pulling off his protective gear, "whoever called this in either has no idea what they're talking about, or they're deliberately wasting emergency resources." "I'd go with option 2, I replied, handing him copies of the harassment documentation I'd been keeping for months. But while emergency crews were searching my property, something beautiful was happening that Brenda hadn't anticipated. The news crews she'd invited to document my dangerous compound were getting a very different story. Dorothy Vance had arrived with a thermos of coffee and a folder full of documentation. "Young man," she told the Channel 7 reporter, "that woman has been terrorizing this community for months. This is just her latest attempt to silence someone who discovered her crimes." Jake Morrison showed up with his mother Sarah, both wearing matching Gallagher Workshop Program t-shirts that Sarah had apparently made overnight. "This man taught my son electrical engineering," Sarah told Channel 9's cameras. "He's the most safety-conscious instructor I've ever encountered. This is character assassination. Plain and simple." By noon, the emergency vehicles were gone, but the news crews stayed. What had started as Brenda's attempt to destroy me on live television was turning into a community rally supporting my program and exposing her harassment campaign. The final twist came when Agent Rodriguez arrived at 2 p.m. with a federal search warrant. Not for my property, for Brenda's. "Mr. Gallagher," he said quietly, as news cameras filmed in the background, "we've been monitoring the situation all morning. Filing false emergency reports to interfere with a federal investigation is a serious crime. We're executing search warrants on Mrs. Thornfield's property and financial records right now." I watched through binoculars as FBI agents carried boxes of evidence out of Brenda's McMansion. Her heated driveway, her grow lights, her entire electrical system was being photographed and documented by federal investigators. But the most satisfying moment came when she tried to flee. Around 4 p.m., as the scope of the FBI investigation became clear, Brenda apparently decided to make a run for it. I watched her white BMW race down the mountain road, probably heading for the airport or a lawyer's office. She made it exactly 3 miles before state troopers pulled her over. Agent Rodriguez called me with the update. She had $47,000 in cash, a fake passport, and detailed financial records showing exactly how much electricity she'd stolen. We also found communications with the development company promising her $500,000 for delivering your property. As evening approached and residents began arriving at the high school gymnasium for the meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my grandfather's medical emergency: complete confidence in the outcome. Walter insisted on attending despite his recent health scare. "That woman tried to murder me this week," he said, adjusting his VFW cap and checking his portable oxygen supply. "I want to see her face when she realizes who she messed with." But when 7 p.m. arrived and the gymnasium filled with 300 residents, local media, and law enforcement officials, there was one person notably absent from the crowd. Brenda Thornfield was sitting in a federal holding cell, finally learning what real consequences looked like. The meeting could proceed without her, because after months of harassment, theft, and attempted murder, justice was about to be served to a community that had waited far too long to hear the truth. Walking into that packed gymnasium felt like stepping into the arena where David was about to face Goliath. Except this time, David had federal agents, utility company lawyers, and a $2.3 million inheritance backing him up. 300 residents filled every seat, with overflow crowds standing along the walls. Local news crews had set up cameras in the back, their bright lights casting long shadows across a crowd that buzzed with anticipation. The smell of fresh paint from recent gymnasium renovations, mixed with the nervous energy of people who knew they were about to witness something historic. Dorothy Vance took the microphone first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing community meetings. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address urgent infrastructure concerns that affect every household in Pine Ridge Commons. I'm turning the floor over to Samuel Gallagher, who has information that will shock and concern all of us." The sound of my footsteps echoed as I walked to the front, carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to destroy lives and reshape our entire community. Walter sat in the front row, oxygen cannula visible, his presence a powerful reminder of what this fight had cost our family. 3 months ago, I began, I started noticing unusual power consumption patterns in our community. Tonight, you're going to learn why your electrical bills have been higher than they should be, and who's been stealing from every family in this room. I clicked to my first slide, a photograph of Brenda's illegal electrical bypass, captured in high resolution with engineering annotations. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people recognized the community junction box they drove past every day. This is an illegal electrical bypass that's been siphoning power from our community grid for 8 months. The person who installed this system stole approximately $24,000 worth of electricity. Electricity that every family here has been paying for through increased rates and infrastructure strain. County Commissioner Williams leaned forward in his seat. "Mr. Gallagher, do you know who installed this equipment?" "I do. But before I reveal that, I need to share something that will explain why this theft operation was far worse than simple stealing." The gymnasium fell silent as I clicked to the next slide, a photograph of Walter's oxygen concentrator, silent and dark in our cabin during the power outage. 4 days ago, someone deliberately cut power to my grandfather's medical equipment during a blizzard. My 89-year-old grandfather, a Korean War veteran, nearly died because someone wanted to silence me after I discovered their theft operation. The sound of angry murmurs filled the gymnasium. I could see faces in the crowd shifting from curiosity to outrage as the implications sank in. The person who cut my grandfather's power, the person who's been stealing from this community for months, the person who filed false emergency reports this morning to try to discredit me before this meeting, is your HOA president, Brenda Thornfield. The explosion of voices was immediate. Shouts of anger, demands for explanation, the scraping of chairs as people turned to look for Brenda. It took Dorothy several minutes to restore order. Mrs. Thornfield was arrested by federal agents this afternoon, I continued, on charges of wire fraud, utility theft, filing false police reports, and obstruction of justice. But the story doesn't end there. I clicked to my final slide. The original Pine Ridge Power Cooperative Incorporation documents, with Walter's signature clearly visible. You see, Brenda Thornfield wasn't just stealing electricity from the community. She was stealing from me, personally, because I am the primary shareholder and board member of Pine Ridge Power Cooperative, the utility company that supplies power to every house in this development. The silence was deafening. You could hear the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic as 300 people processed what they'd just learned. County Sheriff Martinez stood up. "Mr. Gallagher, are you saying you own the power company? I inherited a 23% stake and controlling interest in Pine Ridge Power Cooperative from my grandfather, who was one of the founding members in 1951. Every kilowatt hour of electricity stolen from this community was stolen directly from my family's company." Commissioner Williams spoke into the stunned silence. "So when Mrs. Thornfield cut your power, she was committing corporate sabotage against her own utility provider. She spent months harassing the one person who could legally disconnect her service with a single phone call." The laughter started slowly, a few chuckles from the back row, then built into a wave of amazed laughter as the cosmic justice of the situation hit home. Brenda Thornfield had declared war on her own landlord. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward from where he'd been standing with other law enforcement officials. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can confirm that Mrs. Thornfield is in federal custody, facing charges that could result in 10 to 15 years in prison. Her theft operation has been completely dismantled, and full restitution will be made to the community." Walter struggled to his feet, his oxygen tank hissing softly. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of age and experience. "That woman tried to kill me to cover up her crimes, but she made one mistake. She messed with a Gallagher, and we've been protecting this community's power for 70 years. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Commons looked like a completely different place. And I'm not just talking about the solar panels gleaming on every rooftop. Brenda Thornfield was serving an 8-year federal sentence for wire fraud, utility theft, and attempted murder. Her McMansion had been seized by federal marshals and sold at auction to cover restitution payments. The development company that had promised her $500,000 for my property, they withdrew their entire Pine Ridge expansion plan when they realized the available land came with a 23% utility company owner who had zero interest in selling. But the real transformation was in our community itself. Dorothy Vance was elected as the new HOA president by a unanimous vote, running on a platform of transparency, accountability, and never again. Her first act was to eliminate the harassment-based enforcement policies Brenda had weaponized against residents. Her second was to establish the Gallagher Community Education Fund, using the recovered theft money. The fund started with $47,000, every penny Brenda had stolen, plus penalties and interest. But when word spread about the youth electrical program, donations poured in from across the state. The Pine Ridge Power Cooperative Board voted to match all contributions dollar for dollar, turning our local program into a regional renewable energy education center. Jake Morrison was our first scholarship recipient, earning a full ride to Colorado State University's electrical engineering program. Sarah Morrison became our volunteer coordinator, bringing her military logistics expertise to manage a program that now served over 150 kids annually. Even Jennifer, my ex-wife, started volunteering, teaching financial literacy workshops that help teenagers understand the economics of renewable energy. Walter became the program's most popular instructor, teaching weekly classes he called History of Power, stories about rural electrification, community building, and what happens when ordinary people decide to fight for what's right. At 90 years old, he was healthier and more energetic than he'd been in years, powered by purpose and the satisfaction of watching his legacy grow. The workshops expanded beyond basic electrical skills. We now offered courses in solar installation, energy efficiency, grid management, and entrepreneurship. Local contractors started hiring our graduates as apprentices. The State Community College partnered with us to offer accredited certification programs. But my favorite addition was the Brenda Thornfield Memorial Garden, a community space where we composted organic waste and grew vegetables using solar-powered irrigation systems. The irony was perfect. The woman who'd tried to steal our power was now memorialized in a garden that generated clean energy and fed hungry families. The legal aftermath was equally satisfying. The FBI investigation revealed that Brenda's theft operation was part of a larger fraud network targeting HOA communities across Colorado. Her conviction led to 12 additional arrests and the recovery of over $400,000 in stolen utility services. Pine Ridge Commons became a case study in federal law enforcement training programs. Pine Ridge Power Cooperative flourished under new leadership. We implemented community solar programs, energy storage systems, and grid modernization projects that reduced everyone's power bills by an average of 30%. Property values increased not because of aesthetic conformity, but because of genuine infrastructure improvements and community pride. The most rewarding moment came during our first annual Power of Community Festival, a celebration of renewable energy, education, and second chances. Over 2,000 people attended workshops, demonstrations, and presentations about sustainable living. Local businesses sponsored booths, selling everything from solar generators to organic honey from our community beehives. As I stood on the festival stage, looking out at families learning about solar power, teenagers building circuit boards, and elderly residents sharing stories about rural electrification, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my grandfather first brought me to this mountain: complete satisfaction with my place in the world. Walter sat in the front row, oxygen tank barely audible above the crowd noise, beaming with pride as Jake Morrison demonstrated a solar panel installation to a group of fascinated middle schoolers. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd, "before we wrap up today's festival, I want to share some exciting news. Thanks to community support and utility company matching funds, we're expanding our educational programs to serve 5 additional counties next year." The applause was thunderous, but it was Walter's smile that meant everything.
You know what really gets me? This wasn't about solar panels. This was about a man keeping the last promise he made to his dying wife. Marcus worked 30 years for Pacific Gas and Electric, keeping entire city power up. But in his own neighborhood, HOA President Vivian Blackwell decided his wife Sarah's environmental dream needed her personal approval. Here's the beautiful irony. While Vivian spent 6 months harassing Marcus over unauthorized electrical work, the city was operating their main transformer on Marcus' land with their strike achievement. You know what really gets me? This wasn't about solar panels. This was about a man keeping the last promise he made to his dying wife. Marcus worked 30 years at Pacific Gas and Electric, keeping entire city power up. But in his own neighborhood, HOA President Vivian Blackwell decided his wife Sarah's environmental dream needed her personal approval. Here's the beautiful irony. While Vivian spent 6 months harassing Marcus over unauthorized electrical work, the city was operating their main transformer on Marcus' land with their sprite achievement. She was demanding they shut down his legal solar panels on property where they themselves were trespassing. That $50,000 a day fine, those lawyer fees, all funded by Marcus on HOA dues. The men were paying to be terrorized in his home, but Marcus had patience. 30 years dealing with power theft taught him to document everything and let criminals hang themselves. When Vivian finally grabbed the bolt cutter and destroyed city infrastructure, she handed him federal evidence of her complete meltdown. 2 minutes from vandalism to handcuff, justice served with perfect poetic timing. Drop your HOA nightmare below. Hit like if you own ship still means something. Subscribe for more David vs. Goliath stories. Sometimes one promise can power an entire revolution.